When he heard the scrape at the door, his vision blurred, because he realized it was not the wind. The storm raged outside the tiny wooden cabin, its walls creaking under the weight of ice and howling gusts. Snow whipped across the clearing, reducing the world to a riot of white. Inside, the old hunter sat hunched by a dim lamp, a cup of bitter tea warming his gnarled hands. He had lived here for decades, a solitary figure in the heart of the taiga. The loneliness was familiar, the cold was a constant companion. At first, he thought the noise had been a branch knocking against the doorframe. Cabin doors groaned in these woods. But the sound came again, low, deliberate, as if something heavy was testing its way in. He set his cup down, every muscle tensing. His heart hammered, each beat echoing in his ears. It felt ordinary at first, like the usual creaks of an old house settling, until he realized it was anything but. Instinct pushed him to his feet. He reached for the rifle leaning against the wall, fingers trembling around the worn wood. A lifetime of hunting had taught him fear and respect in equal measure, but this was different, a primal dread settled in his chest. Each step toward the door felt weighted, as though he carried the weight of every winter he had endured. He yanked the door open, and everything went still. There, standing in the swirling snow, was a massive bear, a she-bear, her coat frosted and matted. In her jaws she held a cub, its small body limp, half hidden by her powerful teeth. The bear did not roar. She did not raise her hackles or snarl. She simply stood there, unblinking, her dark eyes meeting his. She looked at him, as if she knew him. For a heartbeat, the hunter's mind went blank. He felt the world tilt and spin. He could hardly believe the scene before him, a wild creature, mother to the core, offering her most vulnerable offspring at his threshold. The wind howled behind her, but her gaze was silent thunder. He should have raised his rifle. He should have driven her away, sent her stumbling back into the storm. But the weapon felt impossible to lift, as though some unseen force held it in place. He couldn't scare her off. He couldn't shoo her away like a stray dog. Instead, he stood frozen, rain of snow swirling at his boots, tears stinging his eyes from the biting cold. As the seconds stretched, the bear's eyes never wavered. His chest tightened with a mixture of awe and terror. His breath came in ragged gasps. He could feel the rough wood of the doorframe digging into his palm, anchoring him in this impossible moment. She did not growl. She did not sniff the air. She simply lowered her head slightly, as though to say, "Do you see me? Do you feel this?" The cub in her jaws shivered. Its tiny limbs hung limp. The bear's powerful shoulders rose and fell gently with each breath, but she offered no more. It was his choice now, to act, to remain, to turn away. He felt a fierce protectiveness flare inside him, mingled with guilt for the rifles he had carried all these years, the lives he had taken, the balance he had upset. He could not move. He wanted to chase her away. But he couldn't. Something in her gaze pierced him to the core. In his mind's eye, he saw all the winters he had known, the tracks he had followed, the animals he had wounded and left behind. And now, here was this mother, bringing her child to him, her greatest enemy, seeking something he could not name. Mercy? Aid? Or simply acknowledgement? He took a step back, recognizing that his cabin had become a crossroads of fate. The lamp flickered, and for a moment the woman's cold breath hung visible between them, swirling like smoke. She lowered her head further, proffering the cub as though presenting a gift, a plea. He swallowed hard, his throat constricting. He felt an awakening deep in his bones, humility. The wind shrieked around them. He thought he heard a soft whimper from the cub. His rifle lay forgotten inside, its barrel pointing uselessly at the snow. The bear's eyes burned with an ancient wisdom he could not articulate, something both sorrowful and hopeful. He was the hunter, yet she stood before him in perfect calm, mother to mother, heart to heart. He opened his mouth, words lodged like ice. Finally, he managed a whisper, "You brought her to me." The bear's gaze held steady. Then, with a gentle grunt, she released the cub into the snowdrift at his feet and backed away, never taking her eyes off him. It was as if she trusted him to do the right thing. He wanted to drop to his knees, to cradle the cub in his arms. He wanted to apologize, to every being he had ever harmed. Yet he simply stood there, tears freezing on his lashes. The storm thundered. The bear turned and lumbered back into the white oblivion, cub at her side. He watched until they disappeared, until the swirling veil of snow swallowed them whole. Then he closed the door, his world irrevocably changed. He leaned against the wooden plank, heart pounding, breath trembling in his chest. He had been ready to fight, to defend his home, and instead, he had witnessed something far greater, a testament of trust, a moment of pure, unspoken grace. He did not know what would come next. But he knew, without a doubt, that he would never be the same. He watched, heart pounding, as the great bear settled on the wooden threshold like a colossal, solemn dog. The cub lay between her massive paws, its tiny chest rising and falling in ragged, desperate gasps. A thin mist of breath curled from its muzzle, and each shuddering exhale was a silent plea. The wind slashed at the cabin, but she paid it no heed, her attention fixed on the crumpled shape of her child. Fear knotted in his gut. Every nerve in his body screamed to slam the door shut, to arm himself, to banish this intruder. Yet he remained rooted, rifle forgotten in the corner, mind whirling. The bear's dark eyes, rimmed with frost, never left his. In them was no anger, only an ancient sorrow and a fragile trust that cut deeper than any blade. At last, he found his voice, low and trembling. "Stay there," he whispered, as much to himself as to her. He stepped onto the porch, each footfall heavy with uncertainty. The storm's howl faded to a distant roar as he moved closer, drawn by compassion he could not explain. The bear shifted, rising on her haunches, then backed away a few careful paces, never breaking eye contact. She seemed to understand, this was his domain, and she would not overstep its bounds. He crouched beside the cub, careful not to startle it further. Frost had turned its fur stiff and white around the muzzle. A deep gash ran along one flank, matted with blood and ice. The little creature whimpered, a broken sound that shattered the remnant of his stoicism. He pressed a gloved hand to its flanks, feeling life ebb beneath the brittle fur. She remained motionless, a silent sentinel. He realized then, she had brought him this burden, laid it in his hands across the threshold of her world and his own. A thought flickered in his mind, she knew he would help. There was nothing he could do here in the open. The wind would kill it as surely as the wound. With effort, he scooped the cub into his arms. It weighed little, but even that slight weight threatened to crush broken bones. He stood, supporting its frail body, and stepped inside the cabin. The bear didn't follow, she watched through the gap, her silhouette outlined in the swirling flakes. He crossed the room, fumbling in the gloom for a woolen blanket. The cub's breathing grew more labored, each breath a struggle. He laid it gently on the rug before the hearth, then piled blankets over it, praying that warmth might slow the cold's ruthless claim. He fetched water in his enamel mug, heated it over the fire, and wetted a cloth, pressing it to the wound to thaw the ice and soothe the torn flesh. All the while, he felt the weight of her gaze at the door. He dared not look, he could not bear the intensity of that silent appeal. She had entrusted him with her child. His chest tightened with a pang of guilt, his life had been one of bullets and traps, of tracking and taking. Yet here was a mother who refused to abandon her own, placing faith in the hands that had once brought her harm. He moved methodically, tearing strips of cloth to bind the wound, whispering soothing words to the cub, as though each syllable could breathe strength back into its tiny lungs. He repositioned the blankets, propping it gently so it could press against the steady warmth of the stove. Its whiskered face twitched. For an instant, he thought it might open its eyes, but then the frailty of life reasserted itself, and it sank back into unconsciousness. Exhaustion washed over him, but he forced himself to continue. He ladled water into a shallow dish and placed it within reach of the cub's quivering snout. He rubbed his hands on his coat to warm them, then stroked the matted fur, murmuring, "Hold on, little one. Hold on." In that moment, he understood the depth of a mother's love, raw and unyielding, a force of nature as fierce as any blizzard. Behind him, a soft scrape drew his attention. He turned to see the bear at the door once more. She sat patiently, head bowed, as if offering vigil. The ember glow from the hearth played across her heavy shoulders, and for a fleeting second, her eyes glistened, as though she offered thanks. He swallowed hard, voice thick. "I will do my best," he said, though the words felt foolish in the hush. She inclined her head in response, then settled down once more, waiting. He knelt beside her cub, pressing his cheek against the blankets. "I thought," he whispered to himself, "that she brought him to me, as if she knew I would help." Tears stung his eyes, not from the cold but from the weight of what had unfolded, a creature of the wild, risking everything to place her hope in a stranger. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the cabin, an unspoken covenant had formed. In that fierce silence, the hunter realized that mercy, once given, could bridge the chasm between man and beast. And as he tended to the fragile life at his feet, he understood that this night would change him forever. He sat by the fading embers, the cub's shallow breaths echoing in the silence. Each rasp of air reminded him of another winter, another storm, and another bear, one he had wounded with his own hands. His gaze drifted to the hillside beyond the cabin window, where the world lay buried under snow, and memories buried under guilt surfaced like old wounds. Years ago, before age had slowed him, he had tracked a she-bear through the same taiga. He had followed her prints through drifting snow, heart pounding with the promise of the hunt. He remembered the sudden flash of white fur among the firs, the surge of adrenaline as he raised his rifle. And then, the shot. A spray of fur and blood. He had watched her stagger and disappear into the blizzard, convinced he had ended her life. But the snowstorm had swallowed her tracks, and he never found the body. The forest held its secrets. For days he scoured the woods, guilt gnawing at him, but the trail was gone. He had convinced himself the bear had limped away to die somewhere deep in the white wilderness, and he felt relief. Relief and relief twisted together. Now, as he knelt over the cub, he saw those same eyes, only the cub's were dulled by injury and cold. He pressed a warm cloth to its side and whispered, "I shot into those eyes," his voice cracked. And now she looked at me with the same eyes, not with fury. With trust. He felt tears freeze on his cheeks. The bear at the door had shown no anger. Instead, she had laid her wounded child at his threshold. She had risked everything, driven by a love he had once torn apart. In his bones, he understood her forgiveness. A mother's love knew no bounds, not even the boundaries between predator and prey, sorry and harm. The cub's breathing grew shallower still. Panic squeezed his chest. He wrapped it in another layer of blankets, murmuring, "Hang on, little one." He thought of the rifle slung by the door, its barrel pointed at where the bear waited. He shuddered, imagining raising it again, but he could not. Not now. Not ever. Through the window, he saw the bear's silhouette against the storm. She had not left. Night deepened, and still she waited, as if maintaining a vigil. The hunter stroked the cub's head and felt a fellowship bloom, a bond no bullet could sever. He paced the cabin floor, memories colliding with the present. He remembered the pride he once felt, tracking, stalking, killing. Now that pride tasted bitter. He had believed the taiga belonged to him, that he was its master. But here, in the glow of the dying embers, he realized he was but a guest. The true masters were the creatures whose lives he had thoughtlessly taken. His breath caught when he heard the cub snuffle. A weak movement. He leaned closer, heart leaping. The cub blinked, a flicker of life in its dark eyes. He let out a choked laugh, a mix of relief and sorrow. The storm's roar faded to a distant murmur. Everything else, time, cold, fear, fell away. He looked at the door, at the bear waiting without complaint. A silent plea hung in the frosty air. She brought him to me because she knew I would help, he thought again, his heart pounding with gratitude and remorse. The weight of his past actions pressed on him like the heaviest snowdrifts. He retrieved a small box of matches and relit the lamp. The golden glow chased back the shadows. He arranged fresh water in a bowl and placed it near the cub. He found scraps of dried meat in his pantry and laid them within reach, hoping the cub's hunger would return. Outside, the bear shifted, low rumble vibrating through the door. He shivered, though the cabin was growing warm. He felt a shudder of anticipation. What would happen when she saw her child stirred? Would she trust him enough to come closer? Or would she retreat with regal sorrow, forever bearing the scars of his past violence? Hours passed. The cub's breaths evened. He dozed in his chair, waking at every shift in the wind. The lamp sputtered. The bear remained steadfast. At one point, he woke to find the cub's head raised, eyes half open. He reached out, but the cub sank back. He pressed his palm to its forehead, warm. Night slipped toward dawn. He thought he heard a snuffle at the door and sat bolt upright. But there was only silence and the wind. He exhaled, tension seeping out of him like steam from a kettle. He closed his eyes, listening to the cub's breathing. He thought she would leave in the night. But she stayed. For 2 days, the storm raged without mercy. Snow piled against the log walls, muffling even the thunder of the wind. Inside the cabin, the old hunter scarcely left the cub's side. The little bear lay curled on a makeshift bed of blankets before the hearth, its breaths shallow and uneven. Every so often, it would stir, an eyelid fluttering, a whimper escaping its muzzle, before slipping back into stillness. He moved quietly, as if his own creaking joints might startle it into stillness forever. At dawn on the second day, he warmed milk by the fire, then coaxed the cub to drink from a chipped glass bottle. The cub's tongue flicked at the rim, taking the milk in small, desperate sips. After each swallow, it shivered, and the hunter felt his heart tighten with both hope and dread. He wrapped it in layers of blanket, pressing close to share warmth, whispering in tones meant more for himself, "Stay with me, little one." All the while, the bear mother remained at the door. She never ventured inside, she did not growl or pace. She simply stood there, her great head lowered, watching through the glass pane. Sometimes the hunter would glance up, their eyes would meet. Her gaze was solemn, sorrowful, but unwavering. It held a quiet strength, a tether that bound him to her unspoken trust. He thought he saw words in her stare: protect her. Heal her. He felt the weight of that command more keenly than any shout. Each time he caught her silhouette against the swirling white, he felt relief wash over him, tempered by fear. Would she bolt at a sudden noise? Would she turn on him if her cub did not recover? He could not risk it, but neither could he refuse her plea. That evening, when the wind lulled to a hollow moan, he wrapped himself in furs and stepped onto the porch to clear a path through the drifts. The bear watched, her black eyes steady in the dim light. He sank to his knees, heart pounding, and carved a narrow corridor toward the woodpile. When at last he rose, he found her only steps away, closer than before. His breath caught at the sight, she had edged forward, as though the effort of the storm was too much for her to bear. He froze. The wind died entirely for a heartbeat. Then she lowered her massive paw, pressing it against the snow. When she lifted it again, she had left a clear print, an imprint of raw power and fragile hope. The hunter's lungs clenched. He saw something in that paw print, something more than mere track in the snow. It was a message. She had licked her paw first, moistening the fur, so that when she pressed it into the soft snow, droplets of ice and fur settled like a seal. In that moment, he felt her sending him something wordless, a plea, a promise, a prayer. He crouched, brushing his gloved finger over the imprint, feeling its cold ridges. She is speaking to me, he thought, voice hushed in his own head. Through this trace, she asks me to save her child. Snowflakes drifted down around them. He looked up to meet her gaze again. Her breath steamed in the cold air, her great flanks rising and falling. The lines of worry around her eyes spoke of nights spent pacing, of dangers faced. Yet she trusted him to understand, to act. He returned her silent message with a steady nod and stepped off the porch. With deliberate care, he scooped up fresh snow and carried it inside to water the cub. Each movement he made felt consecrated by her trust. Back at the hearth, he melted the snow, warming it gently before easing it to the cub's lips. The cub drank, eyelids fluttering, and the hunter pressed a hand over his heart as tears stung at his eyes. Inside, the cabin was a cocoon of warmth against the raging storm. He noticed for the first time how the bear's silhouette cut a dark, protective shape at the doorway, as if she were guarding both the cub and him. An odd tenderness bloomed inside his chest. He thought of all the winters he had spent alone, of the cold that cut deeper than any wound. Now, for the first time, he felt encompassed by a different kind of cold, one born of uncertainty and trust. Late that night, after tending the cub one last time, he sat by the door and spoke to the bear through the glass. "I will not fail you," he whispered. "Your child will not die." He heard only the rush of the wind, but he believed she heard him. When he looked again, her shoulder dipped in a slow, solemn nod, an affirmation that transcended words. As he closed the log door for the night, the bear did not fade into the storm. She remained, her form etched against the white, a guardian in the blizzard. He pressed his hand to the wood where her paw had left its mark, imprint still clear. "She has passed her faith to me," he thought, voice heavy with awe. "And I will honor it." In the flicker of lamplight, he realized that true connection, between hunter and hunted, between man and nature, could be forged only in such moments of shared vulnerability. And as he settled onto his bedroll, the echo of her paw print in his mind, he knew the storm had brought more than hardship. It had brought a bond as unexpected and enduring as the taiga itself. When the cub's eyelids fluttered open at dawn, the old hunter felt his heart stop, then shatter into pieces of relief. The little bear blinked up at the hearth's glow, whiskers twitching as it tested its breath. A tremor ran through its tiny body, and then, gathering strength, it pushed itself forward on ginger paws, crawling toward the warmth. Its progress was wobbly, each movement a small victory against the frost that still clung to its fur. The hunter knelt beside it, voice choked with wonder. "You're alive," he murmured, pressing a hand to its back in awe. He felt tears sting at his cheeks, tears for the cub's suffering, tears for the mother who waited patiently beyond the door, and tears for the humbling gift of this second chance. His old bones ached, but he rose on unsteady legs, guiding the cub to a shallow bowl of melted snow and warmed milk. It lapped at the liquid with surprising vigor, then curled against the blankets, sated at last. He paced the cabin floor, the weight of the night's work pressing on him like a snowdrift. The storm had eased, pale light filtered through the frosted windows. "That's it," he told himself, voice firm with forced certainty. "I've done what I can. In the morning, she'll take her cub and they'll leave." He imagined them vanishing into the glittering white, a mother and child reunited, leaving him once more in solitude. It pained him to think of letting go, but he believed it was right. By midday, the cub was stronger, exploring the edges of the hearth, sniffing at the hunter's boot. Its little snorts made him smile, a sound he thought he would never hear again. When the cub attempted its first unsteady steps, he gently lifted it, murmuring encouragement. It tottered, swayed, and then, miraculously, found its balance. The hunter's pride swelled, he almost laughed aloud. When twilight approached, he gathered the cub and carried it to the door. He set it down in the snow, soft flakes drifting onto its dark fur. The mother bear was there, her form outlined by the silver light. He stepped back, heart pounding, certain she would scoop up her child and depart. Instead, she sat back on her haunches and watched, head tilted. The hunter's chest tightened. He felt an urgent rush of disappointment. Had he misread her trust? Had the cub's life been for naught? She did not move to retrieve her cub. She merely lay down beside it, her great bulk settling gently into the snow. The cub looked up at her, then at the cabin, confusion in its eyes. The hunter realized then that the bond between them transcended simple reunion. She did not simply want her cub back, she wanted to stay. To remain close. And in that silent refusal to leave, she asked him for something more. He swallowed, voice barely a whisper. All this, and you still stay. He felt a surge of gratitude and fear, gratitude for the depth of her trust, fear at the magnitude of what she asked him to bear. For he understood now that her need was not just for survival, but for connection, between mother and child, between creature and man. The cub hesitated, then in the soft glow of dusk, it pulled itself forward on unsteady legs. It reached the mother and nestled against her flank. The hunter watched as she nuzzled the cub gently, her muzzle brushing its fur. A quiet harmony settled over them, the storm's howl replaced by a deeper, wordless chorus of life renewed. He closed the door slowly, leaning his forehead against the cold wood. He could scarcely trust his senses, the storm had brought him this gift, only to bind him to its wild inhabitants in a new, unexpected way. He felt a tremor of wonder, the mother and cub would not simply vanish at dawn. They would remain, sharing his home, weaving their fate into his. He leaned against the wall inside, drawing deep breaths. The cub's soft snores drifted from the porch, the mother's silhouette stood guard beyond the glass. He thought of his old life, of rifles and traps, of blood and solitude, and knew that nothing could ever be the same. He sank to his knees and pressed a hand to his heart. The warmth of the fire spread through him, but it was nothing compared to the blaze that had ignited in his soul. He whispered, I thought this was the end, but nature had another surprise in store. When dawn's pale light crept through the frost-laced windows, the old hunter felt an unaccustomed tremor in his bones. He dressed in silence, each movement deliberate, as though afraid to break the fragile peace that had settled over his cabin. The storm had passed, the world lay washed in crisp quiet. He stepped onto the porch, breath rising in gentle clouds, heart still uncertain of what he might find. There she stood, the great she-bear, sturdy as ancient stone. Her cub nestled at her side, whiskers twitching in the cold air. As he met her gaze, she took a single, measured step forward. The hunter froze, rifle still leaned against the log wall behind him, unable to gauge the boundary between courage and fear. She drew nearer, slow and solemn, until the tip of her muzzle brushed his forehead. The touch was feather-light, yet it sent a jolt through his skull that outmatched any shot he had ever fired. He turned to stone. In her dark eyes burned no revenge, no anger for past wrongs, only a gentle reckoning, as though she offered forgiveness in that simple caress. He stood, unblinking, while her breath warmed his brow. Time thinned and collapsed, the memories of cold hunts and wounded creatures, the loneliness of long winters, they all converged in that moment. And then, as tenderly as she had come, she withdrew, nudging her cub before her. The cub, its fur still patchy with frost and scar, rose to its trembling legs. It dipped its head in a hesitant bow, then fell in line behind its mother. Together, they turned and padded away from the cabin, paws pressing new patterns into the fresh snow. The hunter watched until their dark forms melded with the forest's edge, until the tall pines swallowed them whole. He closed the door with a slow click and leaned against the wood, chest tight with a sorrow he hadn't anticipated. He whispered, voice choked with wonder, "It's over." He stepped back inside and surveyed the empty porch, the blankets he'd laid out, the bowls of water and milk now half frozen, the faint scent of fur lingering in the air. He realized he had no words left, only the echo of that gentle forgiveness, imprinted on his skin like a blessing. Days slipped by, each one stretching longer than the last. The hunter tended to his usual chores, splitting logs, stoking the fire, mending traps he no longer meant to use. Yet every task felt hollow, as if performed on the husk of a life once full of purpose. He found himself pausing at the door, expecting to see her there. He would summon the memory of her gaze, her muzzle against his brow, and feel his heart seize with equal parts comfort and ache. By the end of the week, the silence pressed in around him. He could taste it in his morning tea and hear it in the restless whistle of the wind through the chimney. The cabin, once alive with an impossible bond, felt unbearably still. His dreams were haunted by paw prints in fresh snow, by the cub's soft whimpers, by the sound of that faithful touch. He realized that the story was far from over, for him, at least. The bond the bear had forged in desperate need had transformed into something that even time could not dissolve. He sensed her presence in every shadow beyond the windows, in every echoing footstep on the porch boards. The forest no longer seemed a backdrop to his solitary existence, it was a living tapestry woven with threads of memory and tenderness. He sank into his favorite chair by the hearth, the fire crackling in soft protest at the emptiness. He closed his eyes and felt the warmth on his forehead, as though her muzzle rested there still. A single tear slid down his weathered cheek, freezing before it could reach his collar. He had survived countless storms and faced death in its myriad forms, yet this absence felt more penetrating than any blade. He pressed a hand to his heart, where the echo of her forgiveness still reverberated. "I thought it was over," he murmured, voice thick with longing. "But I was wrong." Outside, the forest whispered its secrets, indifferent to his grief. Yet he knew she watched him still, from some hidden clearing, from behind a stand of birches, her presence woven into the very fabric of the wilderness. And though she had taken her cub back into the untamed world, the gift she had left him endured, the knowledge that mercy and wonder flourish even in the coldest places. He rose, determined to honor that gift. He gathered fresh blankets, stacked them on the porch, and placed bowls of water by the door. He did not know whether she would return, but he knew he would wait, as she had waited for him. For the bond they had forged was more than circumstance, it was a promise etched in frost and fur, unbroken by distance or time. A week had passed since the mother and her cub disappeared into the forest. The hunter's cabin felt emptier than ever, each morning silence pressed upon him like freshly fallen snow. He rose before dawn, moved through his chores with mechanical precision, and spent his evenings by the hearth, imagining distant footprints in the drifts. He had restacked the firewood, cleaned the rifle he no longer intended to fire, and left out extra blankets and water on the porch, gestures of a bond that refused to fade. On the 8th morning, the wind was calm and the sky a pale wash of blue. He stepped onto the porch, coffee steaming in his hands, hoping for a familiar silhouette against the white. The snow lay undisturbed, save for one set of tracks, big, round pawprints leading straight to the cabin door, and no other. His heart skipped, then thundered. He followed the trail, breath catching, until he stood face to face with the she-bear, alone as ice. She was thinner now, winter had taken its toll, but her eyes still shone with that ancient intelligence. She stood motionless, ears tilted forward, as though waiting. He set his mug down and approached slowly, mind racing with questions. Where was her cub? Had he survived? Guilt and relief warred in his chest. He had feared this moment. What if she blamed him? What if her faith in him had been misplaced? She lowered her head, nose twitching with the scent of his cabin. Then, as he watched in breathless silence, she reached into the snow beside her and dragged forward something dark and heavy. The hunter knelt to get a better look. It was the tanned hide of a moose, still warm where she had laid it. He pressed a hand to his mouth, stunned. How had she hunted so large a creature alone? How had she brought this tribute across miles of ice and timber? He rose slowly, studying her bowed head. The moose hide was folded neatly, its soft underfur catching the morning light. He did not know how she had procured it, whether through cunning or desperation, but he understood its meaning instantly. It was a gift. A gesture of profound gratitude from a mother who had once been his prey. A mother who had trusted him to heal her child and to honor that trust. He knelt and laid a free corner of the hide onto the porch boards, feeling its surprising warmth. The smell of fur and musk filled his nostrils, a reminder that the wild still pulsed at his doorstep. He looked up at her, voice thick. "Thank you," he whispered, though the words felt inadequate. He had no idea how to accept such generosity, yet he knew he must. The bear watched him with solemn eyes. For a moment, time held its breath. Then, with a small grunt, she turned away. He felt the weight of her gift settle in his bones, the knowledge that mercy, once given, could reshape the divide between man and nature. He followed her gaze as she padded across the snow, leaving only her single line of tracks in her wake. He watched until she disappeared among the trees, the moose hide left behind like a silent oath. The snow closed over her tracks almost immediately, erasing the path she had taken. He stood alone on the porch, the thick hide draped over his arm, and felt an ache for the cub he had helped save. But more than that, he felt the profound honor of being chosen by a creature he had once sought to kill. Inside, he hung the hide from a sturdy beam, its weight a constant reminder of that impossible bond. Every night, he would gaze at it, feeling the echo of her gift resonate against the smooth walls of his cabin. In the mornings, he would set out fresh water and blankets, even though she never returned. He left the door ajar sometimes, as though inviting her back, trusting that if she wished, she could walk through again. But she never did. And yet he did not feel abandoned. The return of the bear and her silent offering had sealed something sacred between them, an unspoken promise that transcended distance and time. He understood now that the story did not end when she walked away, it continued in every act of kindness he showed to the land and its creatures. He closed his eyes and let the memory of her bowed head and the weight of that moose hide fill his heart. He had been hunter and healer, predator and protector. And in her final gift, he had been granted the rarest of honors, to stand not above the wild, but among it, forever changed by the trust of a mother bear. He no longer reached for his rifle at dawn. The weight of it slung across his back had felt natural all his life, a constant companion through snow and silence. But after the bear's gift of the moose hide, the old hunter stepped outside each morning unarmed, as though shedding an old skin. He placed his hands on the door frame, inhaled the crisp air, and felt a tremor of something unfamiliar, liberation. In the cabin, the rifle remained propped against the wall, untouched. He ran his fingers over its polished wood one last time, then set it aside. It felt wrong now to raise a weapon at any creature that crossed his path. He had once prided himself on his skill, on the trophies that lined the walls. Now those same walls echoed with memories of fur, fear, and forgiveness. He could no longer look at the rifle without seeing in its barrel the eyes of that she-bear forgiving him with a gentle touch. He spent his days in a new ritual. Before the sun climbed the sky, he laden a small sled with scraps of meat, nuts, and dried berries. He trudged into the forest along a familiar path, the sled's runners whispering over the frozen earth. At a clearing where tracks converged, deer, fox, hare, he set out morsels of food, arranging them in neat piles on flat stones. He did this not for sport but as an offering. Each piece laid was a word of apology, a sign of respect for lives he had once thought expendable. He watched from the tree lean, heart pounding whenever a flick of movement caught his eye. A fox crept in first, sniffed a handful of meat, then darted away into the pines. Later, a family of hares hesitantly approached the berries, their noses quivering. He smiled to see them feast, their bright eyes reflecting trust. When a lone stag paused to pick at the scattered nuts, he held his breath in wonder. No rifle cracked the silence, only the soft crackle of frost underfoot and the gentle rustle of fur against snow. Back in the cabin, he rewrote his own story. The nights he once spent polishing shells and mapping hunting grounds were now given to carving small wooden tokens, leaf shapes and bear heads, each one a silent blessing he left near the food piles. He felt a stirring of guilt whenever he thought of the animals he had killed, a sorrow that settled deep in his bones. But beneath that guilt grew something new, a quiet healing. With each day's offering, he sensed a weight lifting from his heart, replaced by a fragile peace. He sat by the hearth each evening, the fire's glow soft on his weathered face. He whispered to the empty room, "If even a beast can forgive, who am I not to change?" The words tasted of hope and humility. He no longer saw the taiga as a quarry to be conquered but as a community he'd wounded and now sought to mend. The trees seemed to lean closer, the wind to carry his contrition into every glade. Sometimes, he thought he saw her, her dark shape among the pines, pausing at the edge of the clearing to examine his offerings. He dared not move, fearing to break the fragile truce. She would vanish into the woods, leaving only fresh prints in the snow. He traced them with his boot, feeling a surge of gratitude. Her forgiveness had taught him that mercy was stronger than any bullet. By midwinter, the hunter's neighbors, rare souls who crossed the blizzard to barter furs, noticed the change. They asked why his walls were empty of trophies or why he carried no rifle. He answered simply, "I learned that life is worth more than any kill." Some shook their heads, others nodded, eyes reflecting a spark of curiosity or envy. But he no longer cared for judgments. He had chosen his own path. In his dreams, he walked beside the she-bear and her cub, their massive forms moving through sunlit clearings instead of storm-blinded forests. They paused when he stopped, as though inviting him to share their world. He felt no fear, only a deep belonging. When he woke, the dream's warmth lingered in his chest. One morning, he found footprints at his doorstep, 2 small prints, then 2 larger ones. He opened the door and breathed in the forest's hush. There was no gift today, only the echo of trust. He nodded once, a silent vow passing between him and the unseen visitors. He would continue his offerings, his silent apologies, his acts of healing. He gathered his sled and set out again, the taiga unfurling before him like a fresh page. Each step was a promise, to protect rather than to hunt, to honor rather than to harm. And though he could not see them, he carried within him the memory of her forgiveness, an unspoken bond that would guide him through every snowdrift and sunlit glade ahead. He pushed open the door to his cabin on a clear spring morning, expecting the usual stillness of dawn. Instead, he froze where he stood. There, on the frosted wooden porch, stood a young bear cub, alone, save for the pale light of dawn glinting on his coat. The cub's fur was lush with late winter thickness, and on one paw was the unmistakable white patch he had seen before, the same mark that had told him this was the child he had saved so many months ago. The hunter's heart thundered in his chest. He closed the door quietly behind him, stepping onto the porch with slow, reverent steps. His breath came in shallow clouds, and for a moment he feared the cub would bolt at the sight of him. But the cub held his ground. His dark eyes met the hunter's, unblinking and calm. He did not shy away. He did not whimper. He simply stood, his small muzzle lifted, studying the man who had changed his life. The hunter's chest tightened as memories flooded back, the storm, the mother's eyes, the desperate weight of the cub in his arms, the long nights by the hearth. He saw every wordless exchange, every trembling breath, every moment of trust given and honored. And now, here was the cub again, returning alone, no mother at his side, to this threshold. He knelt slowly, mind racing with questions he could never voice. The cub took a hesitant step forward, his white patched paw imprinting the wood where once the mother bear had left her message in snow. The hunter held his breath, feeling each second stretch into an eternity. The cub's small eyes reflected a quiet intelligence, an understanding forged in the crucible of their shared ordeal. For a long moment, they regarded each other in silence. The hunter felt tears sting his eyes, not of sorrow, but of a profound wonder. He wondered what the cub thought. Was this a farewell? A gesture of thanks? A final gift, given by nature to a man who had learned to honor life rather than take it? The cub shifted his weight, then turned. He paused at the edge of the porch, looking back one last time. The hunter rose to his feet, heart pounding so fiercely he feared the cub might hear its echo. He watched as the cub padded down the steps and headed toward the trees, each step measured and unhurried. The hunter did not move to stop him. He felt that this was a moment that required no words, no reach, no call. It was a leaving as natural as spring itself. When the cub slipped among the birches and vanished from sight, the hunter remained rooted, unable to breathe until the empty air filled his lungs. Then, as though waking from a dream, he swallowed hard and whispered to the still morning, "I stood like a statue. My heart raced. I knew, he came to say goodbye. Or to say thank you. I don't know. But I saw it with my own eyes. I saw it all myself." He closed his eyes, letting the final warmth of that encounter settle in his bones. The world was suddenly too bright, too vast, but suffused with a new clarity. The wilderness was neither wild nor tame, but a shared home of endless mysteries and profound connections. If your heart is racing right now, you understand. Subscribe to the channel. Here they tell the truth about nature we so often underestimate. If your heart is now full of awe, type, "Nature is wiser than us." If you, too, believe in a special bond with animals, type, "We are not alone in this world."